from various different sources about what has been happening with the so-called homogenization of data. This is where temperatures, historical records and temperatures are fiddled with and changed normally to make them appear as if they were cooler than they actually were. And there's a whole industry behind this which is called, as I said, homogenization. Someone who's been asking awkward questions in the Senate of the Bureau of Meteorology is the Senator from Queensland, Gerard Rennick. Welcome to Outsiders, Gerard. How are you?
Good, thanks, Rowan. How are you?
Good, mate. Good to have you here. Now, just talk us through, you've been asking hundreds of questions, but take us through the ones that really point to the problem here and tell us what has been going on.
OK, thanks, Rowan. Back in Senate estimates in March, I put over 80 questions on notice to the Bureau of Meteorology, and a lot of those questions were based on the recommendations of an independent peer review that was conducted in 2011 of their observation practices, number one, and number two, of their modelling practices, or what's known as ACORN or homogenization. Now, good science is actually based on empirical evidence, that's real data, rather than what seems to happen today. A lot of science is based on model data. So I was concerned at the fact that the Bureau had started a second data set called the ACORN data set and had made over 900 changes to original recorded observations over the last century. Now, this independent peer review made a number of interesting findings, and I'll just try and summarise them quickly. The first and the most worrying is that they didn't rate the observation practices of the BOM. And the reason why they didn't rate the observation practices of the BOM was the fact that they only used one thermometer at each weather station. Now, world's best practice would dictate that they use 3 thermometers, and that's so that they've got a backup if one thermometer fails, and the other reason is so that they're able to calibrate their thermometers. Now, because they only keep one thermometer at each weather station, they have a margin of error, or plus or minus half a degree.
Yeah.
Now, so the World Meteorological Organisation's recommendation is that that margin of error should be as low as plus or minus 0.2, and that's what the independent peer review has asked the BOM to minimise, and that was 9 years ago. Now, I got the answers back from the questions I put to them in March, and they still haven't got 3 thermometers there, and they still haven't lowered their margin of error to 0.2. So that's the first big issue, and the second big issue is on their modelling data. The independent peer review recommended that they report that data with a confidence interval, and they don't report the data with a confidence interval. They've had 9 years to do it, and interestingly enough, there was a technical advisory forum in 2016 that recommended they actually employ a statistician to tidy up their modelling. And to the best of my knowledge, they haven't done that either. That's a question I've got to put to them. But the fact that they went out and released this data without having a statistician even look at it is worrying in itself.
Well, Gerard, we've seen all sorts of mistakes from the BOM. They would argue that they're legitimate mistakes. We saw just before Christmas, for example, in December, the BOM proclaimed that there would be no rain until at least April or May of this year on the eastern seaboard. And in fact, we had more rain and a bigger rainfall in those 4 months than for a long time, for decades, I think. The question of 0.5 of a degree, that's a massive amount. Seeing as all of global warming is supposed to revolve around the idea of a 1.5 degree increase in temperatures before the end of the century, half a degree in any reading coming from the BOM could be inaccurate.
That's right, Rowan, and it's actually plus or minus half a degree. So it's actually a degree in total.
A full degree, yeah.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is their homogenised data up to the end of 2016 showed an increase in the last century of 1.23 degrees. That's over 50% hotter than the actual observation of 0.8 degrees. But what's interesting about that is that they failed to take into account the change in their weather stations from large Stevenson screens to small Stevenson screens. Now, there was an international study done in Spain that was reported in the International Journal of Climatology that showed there was a difference of 0.54 degrees, and this was done over the course of a year, between the large Stevenson screen and the small Stevenson screen. Now, if you were to actually add the half a degree or plus or minus half a degree margin of error with their thermometers to the, let's say, half a degree margin of error with the measuring stations, the weather stations, sorry, the Stevenson screen, that would be a whole degree of difference. So that rise of 0.8 in the last century is well within the margin of error.
Margin of error, Rita.
Yeah. So long story short, you can't really draw enough. There's not enough confidence in the data to draw any conclusions as to what the trend of the data is.
Rita.
What's been the Bureau's response to this study? And are you saying that there is a concerted effort within the Bureau to change these figures to make global warming crisis look worse than it is? Is that the contention here?
Okay, my contention is that they're not following proper quality assurance procedures. So, for example, with those thermometers, one of the questions I asked of the Bureau in the estimates was how much does a thermometer cost? It costs $1,200. There's 112 acorn sites. So to put another 2 thermometers at each acorn site, it would cost about $300,000, which is 0.1% of their annual budget. Now, they've had 9 years to do that, and they haven't done it yet. So that's my first issue with what they're doing, is that, you know, they're not making a concerted effort to improve their quality assurance efforts.
OK, but are you saying that's just incompetence or not follow through, or are you saying there is a plan behind it?
Well, look, at the very least, I would call it incompetence. I mean, you could possibly construe that there's more to it than that. We'll just leave it at incompetence at this stage. But the second thing I have a massive problem with is the fact that they're keeping 2 sets of books. Now, I came from a financial background, and if you kept 2 sets of books or you went back and changed your prior records, you'd be put in jail. The other third issue I have with their quality assurance is that they've said on page 8 of their observation practices back in 2011, they destroyed data when they moved offices back in 2003. Now, 2003 wasn't the Stone Ages. They should have digitalised that data onto software, so they kept the records of their observation practices prior to 1973. Now, they've destroyed their the records relating and the methods relating to their observation practices prior to 1973, which then begs the question, how on earth do they know how much to change the data by, if you think they should be doing that in the first place, prior to 1973, if they don't know what the practices were that they followed prior to 1973?
Well, there you go. Gerard, fascinating stuff, and I guess it gives a new meaning to cooking the books.